Not only have you given me some great ideas as a player playing in a game, if my character feels like there's going to be traps, you're giving me some really good ideas as a dungeon master, Fred. I'm just saying. Hello there, adventurers, and welcome to Wally DM. Today we're going to take a look at part one of the Player's Guide to Surviving Traps, and I thought I would bring an expert along to help me explore this project, and that is Fred Wheeler from the How to D&D channel. Thanks for joining us, Fred.
You're welcome, Wally. I'm going to enjoy the topic.
Fantastic. So we're going to just jump right in. Fred, go ahead and get us started. What are some of the things? And again, this is going to be from a player's perspective, not the DM. So as a player, what are you going to have your character do as far as searching and detecting for traps?
So one of the biggest problems with trying to find traps and searching for traps is traps are designed not to be found. So the first thing I would suggest to you is that if you're going to request or search an area, be very specific about where you're searching, because your dungeon master is going to be paying close attention to that. It's one of the things that is part and parcel of Dungeons and Dragons 5e, but it's also part and parcel of other versions of Dungeons and Dragons when you're searching for traps. Also, I would expect a very high perception check to actually find the trap, because the idea when you put a trap in place is to make sure it actually goes off rather than people find it and then disable it once they figure out how to disable it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's going to be pretty high. The only time you might find that trap is a bit easier to find in terms of making a perception check is going to be with the Wizards of the Coast pre-made adventures, because they have a tendency to set their DCs very low. In other words, a 10 is quite common. Now, 10 is only easy. It's not even medium. Mm-hmm. So it's easy to actually find a trap. Most dungeon masters will not like that, and they will change that. But if you're playing through Adventurers League, you would certainly find that some of the traps that you're trying to actually detect and find are going to be much easier, because Wizards of the Coast does that sort of thing.
I have a question for you, Fred. How do you feel about passive perception? Let's say your dungeon master put a trap into a room that's a DC 16. Do you expect passive perception to play a part in that, or are you expecting rolls?
So one of the things I've found with passive perception is, in terms of how I approach it, I use passive perception when the player's character is not distracted or doing something else.
Okay.
If they're doing something else or they're distracted, I wouldn't use it.
Mm-hmm.
But I do use it. The only problem with passive perception and any kind of trap searching process is some dungeon masters hate this particular mechanic. They don't like passive perception and they won't use it. So if you're going to use something like the feat observant, mm-hmm. so you have a higher passive perception to make it easier for you to notice mechanical traps, mm-hmm. because perception and passive perception is probably only going to notice mechanical traps, not magical traps. Be careful if your dungeon master doesn't use it or is not using it in that particular circumstance because you're busy doing something else, because you're distracted, then you're not going to be able to utilize that mechanic. So it's one thing I would say to you is be wary about passive perception. Don't rely on it completely.
Yeah, so if you are a player and your DM likes to put traps in there, make sure that you know off when you're first building your character. If you decide to take expertise and perception so you can find traps and secret doors and stuff, and then double down on that with having that high passive perception, make sure that's something your DM allows in your game.
So one way of actually finding traps is, particularly in traditional Dungeons and Dragons, was the 10-foot pole. So don't give up on the 10-foot pole, because it still has a use even in modern Dungeons and Dragons, because it allows you to detect the plate, trigger, tripwire, or activating switch for a trap with a 10-foot reach on a floor, on a wall, on a ceiling, particularly when there is no sign of the trap, trigger, or plate, or anything to be seen. So there are sometimes traps that you can't spot by just looking or listening or smelling. So you've got to rely on a different method. So don't give up on the 10-foot pole.
Okay, so now if I was a player, Fred, would I tell my dungeon master I always have my 10-foot pole out and searching around, or how would I go about that? Would I just bring out the 10-foot pole in areas where I am suspicious of traps, or do I constantly go around, dungeon master, I'm always walking around my 10-foot pole?
Well, that's really up to you as the player.
Okay.
And it's also going to be based on your dungeon master. Your dungeon master might not just put traps everywhere. They may only put traps in specific locations to protect something.
Makes
So
sense.
that's not really something I can answer for you specifically. I know in traditional Dungeons and Dragons, there was a tendency to constantly have whoever was in the point man or point woman or point person would have the 10-foot pole, and they would be prodding the walls and the ceiling and the floor as you go. So yes, if you have to spell that out every single time or just once, and you make an arrangement with your dungeon master, that's something you have to deal with at your own table.
Yeah, and I think for players out there that try to incorporate that tactic, don't forget too that if you're concentrating so much on traps, you may miss other things. Perhaps there's a monster lurking by or something like that. So as you're sitting there with your 10-foot pole with your sword on your back as you're concentrating on finding traps, you could get ambushed by monsters. So yeah, definitely up to the player and how you play your game.
So another very useful tool for finding traps, and that is Mage Hand. It's the new modern version of the 10-foot pole. The only difference is this thing has a range of 30 feet, and you use it. It gives you much better safety because you're a lot further away as you are feeling around on the floor, the walls, and the ceilings as you go. And it doesn't really require an awful lot of time to actually do that. You can just say, it's a sentence to say, I'm using my Mage Hand to feel the walls, the floor, and the ceiling as we go and moving forward, and I'm in the front. So it's not something that's going to consume a lot of time, but it certainly helps, and it will get past those problems where your perception is not that great and that the spell is doing a lot of the work.
Absolutely. And would you also say that you could use it for like treasure chests or something like that to try to open things, or maybe try to move a doorknob on a door or something in case a door or an item is trapped?
Absolutely. But here's the problem with using Mage Hand to open a door and lift the lid on a treasure chest or something else.
Okay.
If it weighs too much, Mage Hand is not going to do it. And so that's one of the things you've got to consider. That doesn't mean you don't do it. But when the dungeon master says, no, the door won't budge, well, the door might be locked. It might be too heavy for Mage Hand to actually do anything with it. The lid of whatever you're trying to lift up might be simply too heavy, depending on what it's made of. So do it, but expect there is a possibility you'll be blocked by your dungeon master. So another technique that you can use when you're looking for traps, and that is if you don't have the 10-foot pole, don't have Mage Hand, and you're traveling down a passageway or moving through a room, and there isn't a door in the way, you can get a rope and you tie your crowbar to that rope. You hurl it down the passageway onto the floor, and you drag it along the ground, and you're using it kind of like a minefield detector. So that if there are plates or there's a tripwire that's, at a certain distance across that that hallway or passageway or that room, the length of the rope will probably trigger that trap, or as you're pulling your crowbar across, it might hopefully produce enough weight to trigger a pressure plate. But the problem is that some pressure plates require a certain amount of weight.
I was about to ask that.
So if the crowbar is not heavy enough, it won't trigger it. But that's still another technique you can use for trying to find those traps.
Very interesting. Yeah, that's where my mind went immediately. When I think of pressure plate, I'm thinking like at least 50 pounds stepping on it, like sinking in, Indiana Jones style, sinking into the ground. But I had never even thought of that crowbar with the rope trick. That's pretty cool. And especially if something, even with magical traps, if there's maybe in a set of runes that are set to explode on movement, and you throw that crowbar down the corridor, they're going to explode, and the crowbar is going to take the brunt of the magic that you were supposed to get. So that's pretty cool.
So let's talk about magical traps, because a lot of the things we've talked about cover mechanical traps, might cover magical traps, but some magical traps are really hard to find. And we used to use and still use Detect Magic. It's still the best radar device for finding traps. Now, you're not necessarily going to be told that it's a trap, but you know that there's a magical effect in a particular location. And that's one of the great things about Detect Magic, is it will give you the aura. So it gives you an idea. Evocation, if you get an evocation aura, you probably know there's something bad going on wherever it is, because those things tend to explode.
Yes.
So, and cause damage. The other thing is that it gives you a rough idea of where it is. So that can be really useful. It won't be a catch-all for magical traps. There is a spell called Find Traps. Now, this spell is almost worthless, frankly. I find it absolutely repulsive that they have constructed in such a way that almost nobody's ever going to use it, and you're probably better using different strategies. But if you were to use something like Detect Magic or Find Traps in conjunction with another method at the same time, that could be quite useful.
Interesting.
So another technique that I've seen my players use and has been used over the years, and that is Arcane Eye. When you can get hold of this spell, this is really good for recon on a dungeon or any location, really. It's got a good distance, but it's also really useful for noticing string lines, tripwires, pressure plates. You can do a lot of your scoping out at a distance from safety. It's like the telegraphic search for traps option. Now, the problem with Arcane Eye, although it can be used to find traps and monsters and whatever else is in a room, so you've got an idea of what's there, it can't pass through a door. It has to have an open space to move through. What is good about it is it's invisible. So you don't actually give yourself away to monsters as you're looking for your traps. You can move it around them, move past them, provided there's not a door in your way or a barrier of some kind.
Absolutely. There's a reason that's a 4th level spell. That thing is very, very powerful.
Now, for those of you who have access to a familiar, that's a little animal or creature that you can create from magic. Find Familiar is the spell you're probably looking at, but there are other ways of having familiars. If you look at options with your Dungeon Master and some of the options within the subclasses that are there, that's a really good way for searching for traps, so you don't have to do it. Now, if they find the trap, they're probably going to trigger the trap. Not necessarily, but there's a high probability. Make sure you have the resources to create another familiar, because it might get dead very quickly. It's probably got 1 hit point, but it's done its job, and it's better that the familiar dies than one of your party members or one of your party members winds up badly injured. So familiars are a really good technique for searching for traps.
Yeah. And familiars are very expendable. And in fact, I think DMs almost enjoy killing off familiars just to make their players have their characters resummon another one.
Well, one of the great things about Find Familiar is you can see and hear what the familiar is experiencing. And you get a range of 100 feet. That's a long way. Yeah. And this thing works through barriers. It doesn't matter if they are on the other side of a wall. If you have a familiar that can crawl under doors and then make themselves very small and move through a space or change shape in some way. I know the spider is a very common one for using to try to get into places that are hard to get at. Whereas a bird would struggle unless there's a hole big enough. So familiars are fantastic as a tool.
Absolutely.
So one of the things I want to make clear is don't rely on perception to find everything. You're not going to find every trap with perception because there are different types of traps out there. So don't rely on it. Certainly don't rely on passive perception, because there are always problems with using passive perception. It may not be high enough. And also Dungeon Masters don't necessarily like passive perception. Now, for those of you who are hoping to be able to pick up the aura or at least detect the magic from a magical trap, don't rely on that completely. Okay, you've got to have another strategy, because there's another spell that Dungeon Masters like to use. Nystril's Magic Aura. Now, Nystril's Magic Aura allows you to disguise the aura and the nature of that magic, or even hide it completely. You can make something that is magical appear non-magical. Therefore, Detect Magic isn't going to pick it up. So be careful of that. Now, that spell is on page 263 of the Player's Handbook. It is a spell that frequently is not used by very many people. But when Dungeon Masters do use it, it's probably because there's a trap and it's magical. So if you're looking for information on traps and how they work and how your Dungeon Master might be applying them to their game, the Dungeon Master's Guide has a bunch of information, sort of guidelines on how they might work. And it's page 120 to 123. And I would suggest even if you're not a dungeon master, reading that section, because the chances are you bought the Dungeon Master Guide for the magic items in it, right? So you might as well go and look at the section on traps, because they can be a real pain if you don't know how to deal with them.
Yeah. And I also think Xanathar's Guide also has an introduction to traps as well. So I mean that's another resource. If you have the Xanathar's Guide as a player for the characters in the beginning of the book, in the latter half of the book, some DM resources, and there's some trap information in there as well.
So the absolute worst type of trap to deal with is a combination of mechanical and magic. Okay. And when you're dealing with a combination trap where there's magical elements to it and mechanical elements, make sure you use multiple methods to detect that trap. It's not good enough to just use your eyes. You're going to have to use a couple of different methods. Whether you use a 10-foot pole or Mage Hand and you're making perception checks or looking around for danger or looking for those traps, and you've got somebody else very close to you casting Detect Magic at the same time, that's probably a smart way to deal with the really complex traps.
So as a player, being able to have Detect Magic as a ritual is going to be very, very nice, especially if you're in an area where you suspect traps and you have that extra time where you can cast it as a ritual and hold it up for a while and just completely scan the room. That's definitely, if you're a spellcaster, that's definitely a nice essential for your party for sure.
Now, I haven't talked about the Glyph of Warding. There's a spell called the Glyph of Warding. And one of the things about this particular spell is that if you touch it or disturb it, it tends to go boom. But one of the things you also need to consider, or you get next to it or close to it, what you can want to consider is that dungeon masters can put things on top of a Glyph of Warding and it won't activate until you lift that item off the Glyph of Warding. And it's incredibly difficult to actually spot those types of traps. So you better have a really good strategy for dealing with that. Whether you have your barbarian in the front, so they have damage resistance and they're raging, which of course is not going to be very practical because they're going to rage for an awful lot of time since you're going to be moving through this place for hours and hours and hours. Or you decide it's probably smarter to make sure that whoever's got evasion and gets a dexterity saving throw or advantages to dexterity saving throws, and the monk and your rogue certainly have those features at the right level. Put them in the front line. Absolutely. Give them the pole. And if somebody else is standing beside them with Detect Magic, that's always nice too. But the Glyph of Warding, particularly with an item on top of it, is a very difficult situation to deal with.
Okay, so believe it or not, I actually have a few ideas of my own that Fred didn't mention that I'd like to include, and a few of them is going to include spells. So the first one that I thought of is Fog Cloud, and you could cast a Fog Cloud spell if you are trying to look for secret doors, or if you feel that there's like some type of a wind gap or something. If you watch as your fog cloud disperses and there's like areas of air that are blowing or something like that, it could be a secret door, could be some type of a trap. There's also a cantrip that is very rarely used called Gust. So if you are in an area, let's say, that might have a covered pit trap with leaves or something like that, you could use a cantrip Gust like a leaf blower, especially if you're an artificer. You could get your artificer tools out, you could create a leaf blower, and you just get all them leaves out of the way so that you can uncover those traps that the DM has set for you to fall in. We can get rid of those really easy with Gust. One other one that I had considered, I might have got this off your channel, but I'm not for sure yet, is Flour. So if you have some type of flour or sand or something like that, you might be able to detect your pressure plates or something. You might be able to see like the flour will outline them. So if you like scatter flour, if maybe you have a chef character that has like a whole backpack of flour on there, you just scoop some out and throw it around. And then the last idea that I thought of is simply just to pay attention to what your dungeon master says. Perhaps they're explaining something a little bit too much, something that you're not used to. Every other room has just been kind of ordinary, but you get into this room and they're really explaining that this treasure chest looks a little awkward. It's set in a strange position and things of that nature. You go over, you open it, and it's fine, but as soon as you pull it off of there, there's that Glyph of Warding that Fred was talking about, and it explodes right in your face.
Actually, going back to the flour, I think I mentioned flour in one of my videos for detecting a trap where it's using light. and breaking the light beam that's been set up triggers the trap. And it's a pretty advanced trap. And it's the sort of thing you would find in Indiana Jones or Raiders of the Lost Ark. There's a trap there where you break the light beam, and by breaking that light beam, you are going to trigger a spike trap to swing into your body and pierce you. So any kind of trap where the dungeon master is trying to use lasers or light that's invisible can be really useful, even if you find yourself in a situation where they're not invisible and the area is lit. There may be sections that are actually beams of light, and the flower will help to make them more visible to you.
So once again, this is part 1 of the player survival guide to traps. And I want to thank Fred for coming on the channel. Thanks a lot for joining me, Fred. I appreciate it.
You're welcome, Wally. I'm going to enjoy the next 2.
Yes, we have a lot planned for you. So if you've watched this video, either stay tuned for the next one, or if you're watching this in the future, make sure you jump right to the video number 2. And also don't forget to check out Fred's channel, How to D&D. I'm going to put a link in the description below. He's got hundreds, if not thousands of videos at this point for dungeon masters and players. So make sure you check it out. So that's all we have for you today. Thank you very much for joining us, and on to the next. Did you have anything else other than that, or are we ready to exit this one?
I think that's enough. I think I've spilled my guts. I'm going to be so unpopular with dungeon masters now that I've done this video with you. But hey, that's what I do.
All right, I'll take us out of here.